From Iraq's new routes, to Thailand's shortcut to bypass the Strait of Malacca, to the new corridor linking India and Europe. In this video, we take a look at the 3 corridor projects that will change the face of global maritime trade. For over 150 years, trade between Europe and Asia has relied on passage through the Suez Canal in Egypt. But recently, a new project's been launched that aims to transform trade routes, making the primary hub no longer Egypt, but Iraq. Iraq's bold plans to build what some have called a new Silk Road, a modernized network of roads and railways that will stretch from the Persian Gulf through Baghdad, Turkey, and Europe. The project will cost $17 billion and involves building one of the largest ports on Earth. However, the Iraqi Prime Minister and the President of Turkey seem to agree this project is more than worth the investment, posing the chance to completely transform the entire region. Today, Looking For takes you to the Middle East to discover this new Iraqi corridor, which could well redraw the map of trade routes. To understand why competing with the Suez Canal is so bold, one has to recognize the enormous significance of the Suez Canal itself. Since it was first opened in 1869, the Suez Canal's had an impact on Egypt that's hard to overstate. Linking the Red Sea to the Mediterranean made it so the fastest maritime route from Asia to Europe was through Egypt. This has benefited the country in a lot more ways than just a wealth of tolls to collect. Over the decades, entire new cities have appeared. In 1956, Egyptian president announced the nationalization of the canal, a decision that would lead to war a few months later. The Suez Canal crisis. Despite this, Egypt's geopolitical status continued to soar to new heights in the latter half of the 20th century. It's obvious enough why owning an integral part of one of the world's most valuable trade routes can completely transform a nation. And it's therefore obvious enough why other nations in the Middle East have something of a complex relationship with the canal. Many nations, from Saudi Arabia to Iran to Iraq, also use the canal. Iraq even directly supported Egypt's efforts to nationalize it in 1956. However, while simultaneously supporting the canal, these nations have also made various side efforts to become less reliant on it. For example, in the 1980s, Saudi Arabia built the East-West Pipeline, also known as the Petrol Line, a 746-mile pair of oil pipelines stretching across the Arabian Peninsula. The Middle East has broadly benefited from the nationalization of the Suez Canal, but those benefits have been far from evenly distributed. Trade improved for virtually everyone, but Egypt saw huge direct revenue, increased foreign investment, and major infrastructure development. Other nations have seen benefits that are much milder and more indirect. For example, the port of Aqaba in Jordan handles nearly 900,000 containers a year thanks to its proximity to the canal. Various Middle Eastern nations have been quietly discussing the idea of bypassing the canal for decades, but until recently, no one had ever announced a comprehensive, actionable plan to make this daring vision a reality. Then, in April 2023, that all changed. That month, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan visited Baghdad, where he signed an agreement with Iraqi officials. The agreement was to boost economic ties, consider Iraq's need for water access, and one more thing, develop a new trade corridor. A month later, the details of this new trade corridor were unveiled. To the amazement of the international press, it turned out to be perhaps the boldest trade infrastructure plan announced anywhere in the Middle East since 1869. Together, Turkey and Iraq were going to build roads and railways from the Persian Gulf all the way into Europe. The network would stretch from the oil-rich south of Iraq all the way through the country and across the Turkish border, where it would then connect with existing European networks. A project with colossal stakes, since this new, modern trade route would enable shipping companies to free themselves from the exorbitant tolls of the Suez Canal. In 2022, these tolls amounted to $500,000 for the largest container ships. Currently, if you want to cover the distance from the Iraqi port town of Al-Fal to Baghdad, let alone Turkey and beyond, you have essentially one option. Drive on one freeway, built by Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, called, fittingly, Freeway 1. sections of this old and ill-equipped freeway are still single carriageway, meaning there's no center divider between oncoming traffic. Although the freeway does pass through Baghdad, most of the more than 1,000-kilometer drive across Iraq is through remote territory. Only a handful of hotels exist along the route, and there are so few service stations as to make traveling by gas-powered vehicle logistically difficult. While sections of this lone freeway are depended on by numerous local Iraqis, mostly for shorter journeys, very little international trade passes along it, for obvious reasons. Iraq does also have an existing train system, but it's notoriously slow. Freighting oil or traveling overnight on the system's one-passenger train can take up to 12 hours to reach Baghdad from Basra, an average speed of less than 30 miles per hour. This has frustrated Iraqi leaders for decades, because if you look on the map, the route could be, and in their view should be, the straightest, fastest, best route from the Persian Gulf to Europe. That best route, in May 2023, is exactly what Turkey and Iraq announced their intention to build. The whole project starts at the beginning of the new trade route, at the southern tip of the Al-Fal Peninsula. Back in 2010, Iraq launched a project to turn this into the biggest port in the Middle East. Phase 1 was scheduled to be completed in 2019, but has since been pushed back to 2025. However, significant progress has still been made. In 2020, the Guinness Book of World Records certified the port's new breakwaters as the largest on Earth. Builders have also completed basic infrastructure such as docks, berths, and quays, with a total handling capacity of nearly 100 million tons of various cargo and a price tag that's already close to $5 billion. The Grand Fao Port, as it's to be called, will be the gateway to Europe for this new trade route. Beyond the port, the first major item on the list is the creation of an entirely new freeway system. Unlike Freeway 1, the new freeway will have as many as 6 lanes, separated, of course, by a center divider. This will include a main multi-lane airport highway in Baghdad. The freeway will feature comprehensive signage, modern lighting systems, and surveillance systems such as speed cameras. The new freeway will also be much more equipped with amenities, numerous service stations, rest areas, hotels, restaurants, and so on, making long-distance travel much more feasible. Though a major development, the new freeway will pale in comparison to the new rail system built alongside it. The 2-track system will run parallel to the freeway, passing through the same locations. The freight train is initially projected to have an annual carrying capacity of 3.5 million containers, carrying 22 million tons of cargo. This is a far cry from the Suez Canal's annual load of over 500 million tons. But there's no doubt that this new rail link will eat into the canal's benefits, offering a faster alternative to the conventional route. Meanwhile, the adjacent passenger train aims to revolutionize Iraqi train travel, treating passengers to currently unavailable luxuries like onboard Wi-Fi and high-end dining services. But most importantly, the new train will be faster, a lot faster. The new travel time from Basra to Baghdad will be 2 hours instead of 12. Iraq will be scrapping its 30-mile-an-hour train for one that goes 186, as fast as France's high-speed trains. If successful, this will be the largest single explosion in train speed any nation's ever witnessed. Due to travel limitations and economic hardship, a significant number of Iraqi citizens have never left the country or flown on a plane. Most instead travel by bus, by slow train, or on roadways that are not always well maintained. Shooting nearly 200 miles an hour across the nation will be an awesome transformation for millions of Iraqi citizens projected to use the service. In fact, the passenger train's projected to carry 13 million passengers per year. Needless to say, this is a huge project, one that will play out over not just years, but decades. Construction of the corridor is scheduled to take place in 3 phases, with completion by 2050. On April 22, 2024, during a visit by the Turkish President to Baghdad, a cooperation agreement for the development road project was signed between Iraq, Turkey, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, with the bulk of the funding coming from Doha and Abu Dhabi. This partnership is a huge leg up, but Iraq still faces several formidable obstacles along their new Silk Road. Chief among these is the issue of corruption. Thanks in no small part to many years of sanctions and conflict, corruption among both public and private sectors is a reality. Effectively and transparently allocating $17 billion for a multi-phase infrastructure project would be a real challenge. And even if the country manages to overcome this difficulty, it'll have to overcome another problem: competition. Iraq is the underdog in a three-player race to create a new Silk Road. Both China and India are working on their own similar projects to create a new trade corridor between Asia and Europe. Both proposed routes bypass Iraq. Worse still, India's proposed corridor would run through both Saudi Arabia and the UAE on its way past, further boosting already well-off neighbors while leaving Iraq in the dust. To compete with the Suez Canal, the new Iraqi corridor will have to be built in spite of corruption and ahead of other nations seeking to steal the same opportunity. That said, sending 13 million passengers and 22 million tons of goods each year across the war-torn country could very well flip the script, offering Iraq a path to joining the shimmering ranks of Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates as one of the wealthiest nations in the Middle East. If they could pull it off, Iraq will see 100,000 new jobs and $4 billion a year. No small boost to a GDP that was just under $265 billion in 2022. It's a long road, both literally and figuratively, but it's far from impossible. In April 2023, the world changed in one important and very specific way. China, long famous as the world's most populous country, suddenly fell into second place. The country taking its place? India. Now, more than a year later, India is home to a staggering 1.44 billion people, nearly 18% of all human life currently on Earth. India's median age is also nearly a decade younger than China's, and India's largest city, Delhi, is larger than any city found anywhere in China, with its 34 million inhabitants. All of this sounds quite impressive, but to much of the surrounding world, India's surging population is often seen more as a cautionary tale of overcrowding than as the ascent of a new global superpower. However, that perception may be about to change. Today, we'll be looking at one of the most interesting projects currently underway on the world stage: the India-based $20 billion trade corridor competing directly with the Suez Canal and with China. In this new episode of Looking For, we'll explore the fascinating geopolitical situation and enthralling possibilities behind the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. India is arguably one of the most misunderstood nations on the planet today. With a complex history and world-famous cultural heritage, it's a touchstone on any map. And yet, from a geopolitical perspective, the legacy of modern India is something of a departure from the empires and dynasties of centuries past. However, since the 1990s, India's been witnessing an economic transformation that is nothing short of explosive. Tariffs have plummeted, while India's share of the international goods and services market has skyrocketed. According to the Cato Institute, globalization's carried India from being the largest recipient of foreign aid to being one of the top 5 largest economies on the planet. Issues with poverty, education, and other factors still persist, but it's clear from the data that India's reputation is overdue for an update. The world's most populous nation is on a decades-long ascent, and as we're about to see, that ascent might soon skyrocket even further. Rising to economic independence is one thing, but becoming a true global superpower is another. The golden ticket is trade. This is why for centuries, trading routes have mapped out the most successful empires in human history. From the Silk Road to the Trans-Saharan gold trade to India's own ocean trade extending back into the Bronze Age, empires rise out of their proximity to arteries that carry goods across borders. Today's empires are no different. The English Channel is the world's busiest waterway, followed by the Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, and the Panama Canal. Through these 5 routes alone, well over 60% of all trade passes, linking Asia to Europe and Europe to North America. In an anatomical sense, it's through these passageways that major organs like China, the United States, and the European Union continue to be fed wealth and pump wealth back out to the other organs. However, in the last 10 years or so, There seems to have been an international surge of interest in creating entirely new arteries, previously uncharted, which are bigger and faster than any before. The country that arguably set this surge in motion was China. In 2013, the country announced its Belt and Road Initiative. Given its tremendous scale and ambition, many have dubbed it simply the New Silk Road. The plans to build an extensive network of overland routes through Central Asia, as well as forge new sea routes all over the globe, even potentially through the Arctic. The geopolitical implications of this aggressive project stretch from one corner of the world map all the way to the other. But perhaps no country has been more alarmed or proactive in its response than India. India-China relations. Up until the mid-2010s, India's economic ties with China have been growing stronger. But since the election of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014, India's focused more on privatization and liberalization, operating on a simple maxim of minimum government, maximum governance. The result has been that economic tensions have increased. After the announcement of the Belt and Road Initiative, India publicly declared that it would not participate in the project, that at least one of China's proposed new routes passes through Gilgit-Baltistan, a disputed territory, doesn't help. India and China have numerous ongoing disputes along their 2,100-mile border, only adding to the tensions involved in the development of new trading routes. Add to that several military clashes along the border starting in the 2020s, and it's safe to say the future of the India-China relationship has been hovering in flux as of late. Which brings us to September 10, 2023. That's when, at the annual G20 summit in New Delhi, 7 countries along with the EU signed a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU. The agreement, though not legally binding, put India on an all-star team of powerful countries, including the United States, to do something bold and unexpected: take on Goliath. Rather than capitulate to China's initiative, India declared its intention to build a new trade corridor to compete directly with China. It'll be called the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC for short. The project has received high acclaim from several world leaders. President Joe Biden and Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have both called it, quote, a big deal. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described it as, quote, nothing less than historic. And of course, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has sounded even more optimistic, calling it, quote, the basis of world trade for hundreds of years to come. Surely, at least some of this must be hyperbolic, but it raises the overdue question: what will IMEC actually look like? Broadly speaking, IMEC will consist of 2 main corridors, one which will connect India to the Arabian Gulf, and one which will connect the Arabian Gulf to Europe. The arduous, nearly 3,500-mile journey begins in 2 key locations on India's western coast: Mundra in Gujarat, home to the biggest port in the country, and roughly 500 miles south in India's megacity, Mumbai. From these 2 points, the route will travel across the Arabian Sea, converging in the United Arab Emirates at the Jebel Ali port in Dubai. From there, the route will connect to both existing and planned railways running across the Arabian Peninsula, all the way to Haifa in Israel, and eventually the Piraeus port in Athens, Greece. In addition to high-speed rail networks, freeways, and maritime infrastructure, a vast expansion of the undersea network of internet cables has also been proposed. Cables currently travel from Mumbai up the Red Sea and eventually across the Mediterranean, reaching Italy and France. By expanding digital connectivity, IMEC will enable real-time tracking and communication, as well as somewhat literally tying Europe, the Middle East, and India closer to each other. IMEC is focused on incorporating green technology and using renewable energy sources, primarily green hydrogen. India sees a major opportunity in this particular aspect of the project, as it has one of the largest renewable energy capacities in the world and, under Modi, has been aggressively expanding its share of the renewable energy market even further. Along with internet cables, the pipeline network will also be expanded, mainly to pump hydrogen. All of this adds up to a potential revolution in the speed, efficiency, and volume of trade between the included regions. Various participants have various reasons for supporting the project. Western powers generally like the opportunity to push back against China. Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are keen for opportunities to bypass the Suez Canal in Egypt. India, meanwhile, is shooting for the moon, aiming to become the wellspring of what could be the global trade route of the future. However, the IMEC project stands in opposition to some geopolitical realities that have so far slowed, but not halted its progress. The largest and most obvious of these is the war between Israel and Hamas. Hamas's October 7th attack took place less than a month after the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding at the G20 summit. No single event has had a more significant impact on IMEC. Needless to say, it's raised tensions and brought the feasibility of the project into question. Talks were stalled for 5 months following the start of the war. This points to a broader second obstacle, which is the sheer challenge of such a large international collaboration between countries whose interests may overlap, but not always completely align. For example, while Saudi Arabia and the UAE have both signed on to the project, they've also agreed to participate in China's Belt and Road Initiative, clearly not viewing the projects as mutually exclusive and seemingly hedging their bets. Despite this, Prime Minister Modi seems keen to boost India's ties with the Middle East and keep the project going. As recently as February 2024, he visited the UAE and signed a new bilateral investment treaty. Still, progress has been slow and details have not been forthcoming. Just 60 days after the signing of the MOU, participants had agreed to reconvene and implement a so-called action plan, but amid the outbreak of a war, failed to do so. The same month, Modi was in the UAE on February 8, 2024. When asked about the timeline for IMEC, India's Ministry of External Affairs gave a vague answer, describing the project as still in, quote, an incipient stage. In the end, IMEC is a bold vision, hopeful and forward-thinking. Will India be able to interlace itself with the Middle East and the West, bringing about the so-called basis of world trade for hundreds of years to come? Or will persistent tensions and conflict remain a tether around the wings of this ambitious venture? In the coming years, the world will get to find out.
These waters are home to an incessant stream of container ships. Every 8 minutes, a ship passes through what is surely the main artery of world maritime trade. This is not the Panama Canal or Egypt's Suez Canal, but the Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia. Bordered by Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, the strait is an essential gateway for Asia, linking it to India, the Middle East, and Europe. Today, almost 40% of the world's maritime trade passes through this route, which is on the verge of saturation, a situation that could soon change radically. Between geopolitical conflicts and acts of piracy, the region is currently experiencing tensions that could turn the course of international trade upside down. Above all, one of the bordering countries, Thailand, is in the process of setting up a colossal land bridge megaproject to save ships time and pocket the financial windfall that their passage represents. As you can imagine, today I'm taking you to Asia to discover one of the world's most ambitious contemporary projects. Malacca is an important city in Malaysia. Its historic center holds much of the country's history, and the city attracts many tourists. Among other activities, they can enjoy the tuk-tuks that run through the city armed with multicolored neon lights and amplified music. But Malacca is best known for having given its name to a strait, a place which, over the centuries, has become a hub for the world's shipping routes. To understand this, let's go back to geography class for a moment. This natural waterway stretches for almost 900 kilometers. Depending on the location, this arm of the sea is between 3 and 393 kilometers wide, with a minimum depth of 25 meters. Its eastern gateway is the Singapore Strait. It is then bordered by Peninsular Malaysia on one side and the Indonesian island of Sumatra on the other. A corridor that links the Pacific and Indian Oceans, avoiding the need to bypass the Indonesian archipelago. A prospect that saves many days sailing for ships traveling between Asia and India, the Middle East, Africa, or Europe. An additional figure to prove the site's importance: it is estimated that 16 million barrels of oil a day pass through this strait, representing almost 15% of the world's daily consumption of black gold. A strategic position that attracts a great deal of envy. Indeed, for centuries, foreign nations have fought time and again to gain control of this seaway. In 1982, the strait came under the protection of 3 countries: Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. They are mandated by the United Nations to manage its administration and ensure its security. These 3 countries are also faced with the threat of pirates, most of whom are Malaysian and Indonesian. The strait has long been a target for ransom and vessel hijacking operations. After a resurgence of these malicious acts in the 1990s, the situation had become relatively safe in the Strait of Malacca, a state of affairs that no longer applies. In the first 3 months of 2023 alone, 25 armed attacks were recorded in the area. The phenomenon is worrying ship owners, some of whom have already rerouted their vessels to safer areas, even if this means extending the journey time. And some countries in the region are taking advantage of the situation to revive projects proposing a shortcut to the current route. Thailand is a case in point. Since the 17th century, the country has been planning to bypass the straits by building a canal. The chosen location is the Kra Isthmus, an arm of land separating the Gulf of Thailand from the Andaman Sea. Numerous projects have been proposed to realize this titanic ambition, but for historical and economic reasons, they have never been realized. Until recently, the canal project was officially known as Route 9A. The latest version envisaged a canal 128 kilometers long, 25 meters deep, and 450 meters wide. This maritime route would have used numerous sets of locks, as in the Panama Canal, perhaps with the same problems. A marvel of engineering, the Panama Canal is an extraordinary historical construction that today finds itself at the mercy of the vagaries of the weather, as we recently saw in a video. If you're interested in this subject, I've included the link in the description. Another limitation of the project is its prohibitive cost. Meeting in committee to discuss the canal project, Thai parliamentarians pointed out that it would be too expensive to build in relation to its potential future return. What's more, the new canal would create a dividing line that could be considered an internal border in Thailand between the south and the rest of the country, a prospect that does not please the authorities at all. This part of the country, and Patani province in particular, is plagued by insurgencies led by separatist movements. Several thousand people have been killed since 2004. A physical separation could give new impetus to the separatist movement. Finally, the Sea Canal project was officially abandoned in 2020, but not the idea of opening up a new route for global traffic. This desire now takes another form, that of a land bridge. Specifically, the project aims to connect 2 Thai ports, Chumphon and Ranong. To bridge the 90-kilometer distance between the 2 cities, a road, a railway line, and a pipeline are planned. Both ports will be deep-water ports to ensure maximum cargo capacity. The port infrastructure will be able to accommodate all types of vessels, including the huge Panamax and Neo-Panamax container ships. Once in operation, these 2 ports will be able to handle some 20 million containers a year. This activity is expected to create almost 100,000 jobs and boost the region's economy for decades to come. Estimated cost of the project, $35.6 billion, a colossal amount announced by the Thai Prime Minister in office since August 2023. The government officially gave the green light to this mega project on October 16, 2023. According to the government's plans, work is due to start in September 2025 and be spread over 8 years and 4 phases. However, other observers believe that the project will not be completed before 2039. To finance its Titanic project, Bangkok is looking abroad to attract investors. At the end of last year, the Prime Minister undertook a series of trips in the hope of attracting future partners. At present, many countries seem to be interested, notably in the Middle East and the United States. But one country seems to have more appetite than the others for this project: China. The Strait of Malacca is a strategic gateway for the country. Much of its trade with Europe, the Near and Middle East and Africa passes through this corridor. The same applies to its energy supplies. By 2035, the International Energy Agency estimates that 85% of its oil supplies will pass through the Strait of Malacca. This is not a new dependency, but one that has been worrying the country's political elites for the past 20 years. As early as 2003, the then Chinese President Hu Jintao made his concerns public. Since then, Beijing's strategists have been constantly trying to resolve what is known as the Malacca dilemma. This strategic lock leaves the country potentially vulnerable in the event of a conflict with another state. The constant trade and diplomatic escalation between China and the USA unfortunately makes this sad prospect of conflict a real possibility. A possible blockade of the strait by Washington and its allies in the region would therefore be conceivable in the event of war. It remains to be seen whether this company will be attractive and therefore profitable for investors. On this point, there is room for doubt. On a trip to Beijing to promote the project, the Prime Minister asserted that the land bridge would save 6 to 9 days, compared with the route through the Strait of Malacca, 1,200 kilometers below. While this is a substantial gain, it is less obvious than other strategic crossings, such as the Panama or Suez Canals, which save weeks of sailing. What's more, logistics for shipping companies will be far more complex in Thailand. A first ship will have to arrive at the first port, transport the freight 100 kilometers further on, where a second ship will have to take over for the rest of the journey. Nevertheless, traffic in the Strait of Malacca will continue to grow over the next few years. Today, 86,000 cargo ships pass through every year. This figure could rise to 126,000 in 10 years' time, representing a 46% increase in traffic. And at present, the navigation solutions available are imperfect. The Lombok and Sunda Straits, for example, are both used to cross the Indonesian archipelago between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. But this is achieved at the cost of considerably longer journeys. This is difficult to reconcile with a globalized economy that demands ever greater speed in the transport of goods. In this quest for logistical optimization, a second country has revealed its ambitions as an alternative to the Strait of Malacca, Malaysia. This country, which has built part of its wealth around the strait, has no intention of letting itself be overtaken without a response. Its solution? The East Coast Rail Link. Behind the name lies an ambition to link 2 ports on the Malaysian peninsula, which could eventually become a shortcut to the Strait of Malacca. Construction began in 2017, with plans to link the peninsula's west coast with its east coast. The new rail link will connect the port of Kuantan on the South China Sea to Port Klang, the country's main port city at the end of the Strait of Malacca. A titanic project estimated at nearly $13 billion, it could well undermine Thailand's ambitions, even if the time saved will be less. The 2 projects have one thing in common: China. Indeed, Beijing is also financing a very large part of the Malaysian project. This omnipresence of investment in new transport infrastructure development projects is no coincidence. Since 2013, China has in fact been trying to develop a strategic program aimed at being better connected to the rest of the world. Known as the New Silk Roads, it now involves more than 130 countries around the world. Beijing is investing in and buying up infrastructure to better connect its country and promote economic exchanges. From the port of Gwadar in Pakistan to that of Piraeus in Greece, China is multiplying its projects. According to official figures, Beijing has already committed over $120 billion in investments. In Malaysia, these investments include the East Coast Rail Link. In fact, this new infrastructure is significantly ahead of the Thai land bridge. In February 2024, the country's authorities claimed that over 60% of the work had already been completed. While in 2017, the completion date was announced for 2024, today it's December 31st, 2027 that is ticked off the calendar to celebrate the line's full completion. It remains to be seen whether the Thai project will take shape to overshadow this new Malaysian route. Well, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching and see you soon on Looking For. Goodbye.